Hi, my name's Trevor Shirin, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about building empathy, improving our capacity for compassion, and the idea that all behavior makes sense in its context. Now, this phrase, all behavior makes sense in its context, can feel like it kind of gives an out to anybody for anything. And that's not really what we're aiming for. We're not saying that just because it makes sense, it's appropriate or it's something that we approve of. What we're saying is that it makes sense why this person is doing that. One example that I think is really helpful for us is driving in a car and somebody cuts us off. But we can start to have these negative thoughts towards this person based on our own experiences. So we're drawing them into our context and applying our context to their behaviors. Whereas if we apply their context to their behaviors, suddenly things begin to shift. Now, we may not ever know why that person cut us off or why that person is doing this thing, but it can be helpful even just to imagine it, because in that same situation where somebody cuts us off on the road, we can see that person in one way, applying our context to their behavior. And then in a very different way, if we recognize or learn or somehow we find out that they are rushing to the hospital because their parent just fell and is in the ER. All of a sudden, them cutting us off, rather than being angry with them, we suddenly start having this internal monologue of like, well, hurry up, like, please, like, I'll make room for you. Like, go, you should be there. That's an important reason. As we're driving, if we imagine that that is what happened in that situation, our perception and our feelings and what's going on internally is automatically going to shift. Let's imagine that we have a friend who has ghosted us, or they're just being kind of cold with us lately. This can be something that's really hard, and we can allow that rupture to grow and grow and grow until the point where we just kind of say, I'm not even going to invest in this relationship anymore. And this would be the situation where we're applying our context to their behaviors. And there's a really beautiful video on the difference between empathy and sympathy that you can find from Brene Brown on YouTube. I'd highly recommend going and watching that. But this idea of developing our compassion or growing our empathy for another person, when we look for the context of the other person's behaviors, when we start asking questions and become curious rather than angry or frustrated or disappointed or discouraged, we can start to see a shift in our own selves and how we're relating to that person. So back to this idea of a friend who has either ghosted us or become really cold with us. If we start asking questions about, hey, I'm noticing that I feel distant from you, or I feel like I'm getting a cold shoulder and it's really hard for me because I really care about you as a friend. What's going on? Asking about the context, not accusing them of like, you're such a bad friend because you're ghosting me, but instead asking the question of like, hey, I'm noticing this. Is there something to this? Or even coming to it with an idea of the context, thinking about their lives and what they've shared already. I have one example of a very close friendship that I have where I had excitedly missed a message from him to share something new. And I hadn't heard from him in several weeks. And in my own context, I was feeling really discouraged and disappointed in him that he wasn't responding to this really cool news that I was offering. And I decided that I didn't want to reach out again because of that discouragement. And I was just resigned to this idea of he doesn't care. It's not important to him. I'm not important to him. All of these things really pulling his behavior into my own context, and it's skewed. And you can see how even like that idea feels dramatic, and it was dramatic. It wasn't an appropriate response to this friend. After about a month, this friend reached out and he said, hey, I need to talk to you because I'm really frustrated with you. I had sent you this message talking to you about how a family member was rushed to the ER. And the response I got was not to what I had talked about. It was about this really cool thing you were doing. I'm sure for many of you, you can kind of get a sense of what I was feeling in that moment, because now you're seeing the context of both of those behaviors, and it makes sense. It makes sense why he wouldn't respond to me. And it makes sense why I would feel discouraged because I was missing out on some of the context of what was going on. We were able to repair our relationship and move forward from that moment only because we were willing to share our context and to hear the other person's context. So my encouragement for you, or maybe a challenge, is in this next week, how can you look at the people around you, the situations around you, and just say the statement to yourself, all behavior makes sense in its context. And then look for the context. Try to ask questions, because it might be your toddler is overwhelmed because they're hungry. All of a sudden, that one piece of context changes the entire way that we're going to interact with them, where we're not just frustrated about them being spoiled or behaving inappropriately. It's about hunger. They're hungry, and so they're acting out. Or maybe it's our spouse who is being distant, and maybe there's something going on at work that is impacting them, or maybe something with a friend, and we just haven't had the pursuit to ask about that context or to explore it, or even just to sit in the midst of their context, apply that context of theirs to their behavior, and recognize where we have been applying our context to their behavior. Thank you for joining me today for this conversation about behavior and context. I hope that it is helpful for you.